So I figured I would continue my convention review series by not only talking about the next convention I plan on attending this year, but also my favorite convention, period. Now, I don't want that statement to overhype this video or make it sound like this is going to be the most incredible experience you guys ever had in your life, especially if you're used to some other cons, but I do want to talk about some of the pros and merits of Anime Weekend Atlanta and why it's my favorite con ever. Just for a little bit of background, I've been going to this con ever since 2007, the very same year I first went to Dragon Con, my first ever convention. And so I talked about in the Dragon Con video how we met those people in line waiting for the Harry Potter autographs, and those people became like our first ever convention friends, and we've stayed friends with them for years. They were the ones that initially went to Anime Weekend Atlanta and invited us. So we had no clue what was going on. We weren't even, me and my brother were not even really that into anime at the time. So we didn't really recognize a lot of the cosplays or anything like that. But by going, we met up with them and had a pretty good time just for the one day. And that kind of just opened up that door to where we would then go every year and really get into cosplay and the convention scene. So I had, between Dragon Con and AWA of 2007, I had been thrown off a horse and broken my arm. So I had my arm in a sling and was like this, and I was very uncomfortable because the sling kind of pulls you to one side, so your posture is off, and so your back starts to ache, and it's just a horrible experience for those of you who've never broken a bone before. And so I was not happy. I wasn't not having a good time at this con trying to maneuver around and find them, but it was good to see them, and it was good to have that high energy of that convention experience again. But that kind of gave me the idea for what would become one of my signature cosplays. When my arm was in the sling like this, I couldn't help but think of Auron from Final Fantasy X. So, of course, come 2009, that actually did become a cosplay that I did, and is still one of my favorite and most well-known cosplays I've done to this day. I wore him, I think the last time I wore him was at Dragon Con 2014 or 2015. I've worn that cosplay a lot. I actually want to bring it back and update it with some new details and make it look more competent and more screen accurate and just make it look a lot better. Now that I'm older, I'm growing a little bit of facial hair. Of course, I just shaved this morning, but... And the thing with Anime Weekend Atlanta is because it's my favorite con, I can talk about personal stories all day long, but I want to talk like kind of objective about how I think the con is operated and ran and some of the content it offers. But just to remind you guys, this is always my subjective personal opinion. It is based completely on anecdotal personal experiences and is in no way an objective criticism of the con. Whatever you guys decide to derive value from in your convention experience is your personal experience alone. So I'm not going to tell you what you should find fun or worth your money when it comes to going to a convention. It's just my personal take on it. So I always want to say that in these convention review videos. So in terms of the production quality of Anime Weekend Atlanta, so overall it's pretty solid. In terms of content, there is quite a variety. The panels, they're very welcoming to fan panels. In terms of getting like discounted panelist badges, they have kind of had to limit that to 1 or 2 discounted badges per panel because, and a lot of people are very dismissive of this as a bad thing, but I'm actually in defense of it because what you would have happen years ago is you would have 12, 14-year-olds doing an Auron High School host club panel where they would just yell up on the stage and scream in character, and it would just be ridiculous, and all of them would be getting discounted panelist badges. That's a little absurd. So we want actual real content people are engaged with, and so they limited the discounted panelist badge just 1 person per panel. And when you submit a panel, you do have to list who your co-hosts are going to be. Not that it's ever really come up as like a, we're going to strictly enforce who's up on the stage with you. They don't really get into that, but they just make sure to limit the amount of discounted panelist badges they give out, which I think is a solid decision overall. And it keeps the content of the panels filtered to be just better and more engaging with what people actually want to see. So just like MomoCon, we have a variety of different subjects, cosplay workshops, industry stuff from Japan. In terms of the guests, we have a lot more Japanese guests than any other anime convention in the Southeast. Anime Weekend Atlanta has, I think I can say that for a definitive fact, has the best selection of Japanese guests. So we're talking about bands, we're talking about voice actors, certainly. some of the Japanese Fate voice actors, including Archer and Lancer's voice actor were there. I've gotten both of their signatures. Rin's voice actor was there, and occasionally they have some of the more Western voice actors there too. So we had Travis Willingham and Laura Bailey in 2016, I want to say. And then this year we're having Elias Toufexis, the voice of Adam Jensen from Deus Ex. And you may recognize him from some sci-fi shows like Lost Girl and The Expanse. Overall, a great actor, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting him this year because I'm a big fan of his work. I think that the programming in terms of Anime Week in Atlanta is solid. They are known for a lot of events such as the Maid Cafe, and they have a lot of After Dark stuff that's 18+. The convention does kind of shut down at night, although in more recent years there's a lot more nighttime activity than there used to be, so you can easily walk around the con at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. and find people hanging out in the hotel with stuff to do. Now, in terms of attendance, this con has not grown exponentially in the last several years that we've been going. It's maintained a kind of stable amount of attendance. It's big. It's very big compared to a lot of other anime conventions, but it's not like Anime Expo, Katsucon, or Otakon big, and it's certainly not Dragon Con big, but it is pretty big compared to other anime conventions. So it maintains that perfect balance of being big enough for like a lot of large-scale cosplay groups and really hype cosplays and great programming, but small enough where you can actually have conversations with people and make new friends. That's one of the things that you really see with a lot of small cons, is that small con culture, and I'm going to be using that term a lot as I go through this series. But with small cons, because of the scale of it and how there's just a few of you and you can kind of have more intimate conversations about likes and interests and fandoms, you really create a lot more relationships and make a lot of more friends in those smaller cons, because you tend to see those same people pop up multiple times throughout the weekend, and there's less things to do at those smaller events. So that's really where you make a lot of the friends, is the smaller cons. AWA kind of has that perfect mix. Usually their attendance is between like 30 to 50,000, I want to say, give or take. And the only thing that's really spiked in the last couple of years has been the badge prices have gone up considerably, although they're not as bad as a lot of other conventions I'm going to talk about. Certainly not as bad as MetroCon, but the badges have gone up over the years. I remember when it was $35, $45 for the entire weekend, and now you're looking at like $65 or more. I remember when that first jump really happened and how much they increased in price. But overall, it's still a pretty affordable convention. In terms of the venue, now this is going to be something that you guys are going to have to prepare yourself for if you're used to other conventions. So the cool thing about Anime Weekend Atlanta is it is a nice centralized venue that's really tightly compact and easy to find everything, but it's a very strange venue for people that are not used to it. I'm intimately used to it, where I know all the different ins and outs of the venue and I can get around very quickly and optimally, just like a Dragon Con. And I personally love this venue. I love the aesthetic of it. I love everything about it. And I have a lot of nostalgia about it, but I'm actually going there today, actually, to do some panel prep stuff for the Type-Moon group. I can understand if it's a little confusing and it's not for everybody. So it is the Renaissance Waverly Hotel and the Cobb Galleria Convention Center that are connected. And so you can hang out in the hotel lobby and hang out with people, or you can go through the convention center into where the dealer's room, artist alley, and all the panel stuff is. But there's like this mall section of the Cobb Galleria that's mostly abandoned, and it has like a lot of like old obscure novelty shops in there, and it's almost like the underground of the convention center, and you pass through there, you'll see like the gaming area, the arcade area, and the Maid Cafe over there. There's an old theater that's down there too that's been abandoned for years, and I really wish we could do something about that, but I think it's in like some kind of copyright limbo, which sucks. But yeah, so a very, very cool and historic venue, but that little area, I'm sure will throw off some people that are not used to it. So I think that's a lot of my objective praise in terms of Anime Week in Atlanta, and I don't want to say anything that is like defamatory or slanderous against somebody when I talk about the negative aspects of it, because from top to bottom, I adore this convention and I'll always go up to bat for it. But there are some things I think could be improved upon. As an attendee, not somebody that organizes conventions, I understand it's very, very hard to run a convention like this. Very, very hard. You have a lot of different pillars that are in charge of different things. You have a lot of different departments that don't necessarily interact or overlap with each other. But here is where some of the opportunities have come up. You have to be very, very vocal if you're coordinating events about schedule overlap. Now, as an attendee, if you have a scheduling conflict, try to be as understanding and as willing to compromise as possible with the convention staff, and don't demand that your problem be fixed. Or if you don't like the time slot for your panel, don't be annoying about it. Like, understand that they have other things going on, they have other events they're trying to plan, and your event is no more or less special than all the other panels that they have submitted. But that being said, when you submit a panel, they ask you, do you have any other scheduling conflicts? And you can put those scheduling conflicts in there all you want, and sometimes it doesn't matter. You'll still get a scheduling conflict that comes up. And I don't know how the inner workings of this actually work, but it seems like the programming department and the cosplay department do not interact with each other very much. Photo shoots are posted on the official site and on the app, so there is a official aspect to all the photo shoots being hosted. It's not like other conventions like Holiday Matsuri, where the photo shoots are entirely in the hands of the fans and the convention as a whole has nothing to do with supporting it. This is one of those things where, in order to get the engagement of the attendees, the convention itself tries to support on the site so everybody can have visibility to it. But what tends to happen is these two departments don't communicate to each other very well. I had a very, very, very negative experience in 2017 with the schedule. It seemed like nothing. I went through a bunch of hoops to get scheduling conflicts resolved, and then the convention went live and my firearm panel was still not on the official schedule. And when I went to the person I was talking to is very professional, and a lot of praise to them. I'm not going to say their name on here because, again, I don't want to say anything defamatory or slanderous against them. I filled up that room purely through word of mouth and the community that I manage. It wasn't on the official schedule. It wasn't on the little sandwich board in front of the door. And when I go to set up everything, I'm like, hey, I need access to the internet to set up my presentation and my Mentimeter thing for my trivia. And they're like, we don't give out the Wi-Fi password. The convention center never give out the Wi-Fi password. And they were so just rude to me about it. Like, it was, I was very offended. I just looked at them and I was like, I had to cool myself down and control my temper, because I'm like, okay. But it was the culmination of all these issues of, like, the poor communication, the fact that they couldn't be bothered to put the panel on the official schedule, or that they didn't use the information that I gave them that they asked for in the first place to make sure that it didn't cross over with the photo shoot and create a scheduling conflict. And what ended up happening is the time slot we ended up agreeing to was directly before the photo shoot. So we left the panel and went outside to the photo shoot, and luckily my photographer friend was already out there and had all of the cosplayers that were not at the panel already organized in the photo shoot. It wasn't for him, it would have been a disaster. So that's my one negative gripe about Anime Weekend Atlanta in terms of the organization itself. So as an attendee, as somebody who's trying to organize events, you need to be as compassionate and understanding as possible to these organizers that this is a very challenging thing to do. But on the other hand, do be aware that there is some opportunity in terms of execution with the communication between the programming department and the cosplay department. That is my feedback on that. Another bit of caution: do not ever room at the Sheraton across the street. So I've had good experiences with Sheraton as a hotel branch. I've had great experiences with the Sheraton that you can stay at for DragonCon. So it's not the fault of the hotel franchise, it is the fault of that location. So you have elevators that are not maintained. So they don't do the type of preventative maintenance they need to do for a convention. The elevators are always down. Incredibly rude staff, including people that tried to kick us out of the pool area even though it said open past a certain time with a key card. She just kicked us out arbitrarily and was incredibly rude to us. We had people at the front desk that were rude to us. We got denied late checkout. We had key cards that would relentlessly stop working. There is no easy way to get from the Sheraton to the convention center because you have to go off the side of the building, across the parking deck, across a street with no crosswalk, into the parking lot of the Cumberland Mall to take the Skybridge from the Cumberland Mall to the convention center, which is very dangerous, especially if you're like me and you have to carry a crate of armor across the street because the convention couldn't be bothered to schedule your panels at the correct time, so you got to carry your firearm armor from one panel to another area to set up your photo shoot on time because it's late, because they couldn't be bothered to get the schedule straight in the first place. So but that's entirely unrelated. But yeah, do not room at the Sheraton. It is awful. So I'm sure I could tell some of my personal stories of some of the things that I've done at that convention and be here all day. I could probably make a whole series of videos based on that. But I'll talk about some of the highlights. So in 2009, when I was... we had a Final Fantasy photo shoot that was outside at like 9 p.m. I don't know why they decided to do that. So it was dark, it was cold, and the wind was blowing, and I was cosplaying Vincent from Final Fantasy VII. And my girlfriend at the time was Yuffie, and my other friend at the time, Cassie, was dressed as cross-dressing Cloud in the dress, and both of them were freezing, and they both just kind of huddled up against me like, when is this photo shoot going to start? When is it going to end? And we're waiting on my friend Brad, who I've talked about in other videos, and we had to have it outside because he was not allowed to bring his 7-foot-long Sephiroth sword into the venue. So they told him he has to do it outside. And so we see him finally come across the street at like 9:15, 9:20, and his hair is just flopping in the wind like crazy because it's so windy out. And I still got photos of that photo shoot somewhere. 2012 was the first and only year I've been to the ball. AWA does have a rather impressive formal but dance ball that you can attend. It's a very well organized event. It's a lot of fun. Very romantic if you want to go on a date there, but it does cost extra to get in. I had a very good time there, and that was the first year we really started the Fate group, because Fate Zero had come out at the end of 2011 and had finished airing by the end of 2012, so by the time Anime Week in Atlanta 2012 came around, Fate Zero was popular. We had Fate Zero cosplayers starting to come up, and that was the first real ever Type Moon photo shoot we had. It was such a small little group, and it's only grown and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger every year. I started getting to the point where I was the primary host every single year. We had a couple of years where other people tried to host photo shoots that didn't quite go as well, so I eventually just took full ownership of the whole thing. And it's been going very smooth since then. Again, I took over doing the Fire Emblem photo shoots in 2017. This year I'm doing Fate Fire Emblem, and I'm also doing a Yu-Gi-Oh group. Fun fact, Yu-Gi-Oh was actually my very, very first cosplay. So my very, very first cosplay was Kaiba back in 2008. And it wasn't very good. There was a couple things I liked about it. I mean, a lot of people do the Battle City Kaiba. It's a very common cosplay, but a lot of people buy theirs pre-bought. They don't hand make them or commission them. And so the one I had was made by somebody who does wedding dresses, and she put this really nice maroon like silk lining in the inside. It was just beautiful lining, and I loved it. And it looks way better than a lot of the other Kaiba cosplayers that have like red or like pink as their lining, which is not the color that it is. It's more like a maroon or a purple. I remember in 2010 we had a Yu-Gi-Oh group, a full group and everything, and that was a lot of fun. I met some very cool people through that. Now we're finally coming around full circle and doing it again here in 2019, where me and Michelle are going to be cosplaying from 5Ds. I also have an Arc 5 cosplay I'm going to be wearing on Thursday. We're doing a panel and an off-the-grid photo shoot, like an unofficial photo shoot, on Sunday. So Sunday at 11:30 is the Yu-Gi-Oh panel, and then 12:30 is the unofficial photo shoot if you guys want to join in for that. So I have a ton of events planned for this coming AWA. I am so overly meticulous and nitpicky that I have a spreadsheet on my phone of all the different side events we're doing and all the times and the people that are attending the side events. One more thing I want to mention about the venue that's very important. I forgot to mention this earlier when it comes to deciding if this is a viable convention for you and considering all the factors that make it viable, is the accessibility to commodities such as food. Parking is a little bit difficult, and if you decide to leave the venue, you may have a hard time getting a parking space back, so I don't recommend that at all. I've never had an issue with parking over the years, but because they built the Brave Stadium across the street in 2016, I want to say, parking situation has gotten a lot more difficult, so just be mindful of that. Inside the venue, there's kind of limited options for food. There's little stands set up. There's great food trucks outside, which are a very viable option. And then in the little cafeteria area, there's a Subway and a Chinese place. Most people just end up going there. But there's also some great restaurants inside the venue as well, including Murph's, which is a sports bar. It used to be Buckhead Pizza, and the hell with you for getting rid of my bucket pizza. That place was amazing. And then directly across from that is Big Chow Grill, which is a fantastic restaurant I'm going to today, as a matter of fact. And it's sort of like a Korean barbecue, almost like a Mongolian barbecue. I'm sorry, stir fry place where you go and create your own bowl, but they have a lot of different ingredients, and you can make all different types of food that you want. You can make spaghetti and meatballs, you make fettuccine alfredo, you can make a Mexican burrito bowl, you can make a Thai style bowl with tofu, like whatever you want to do. There's all types of ingredients. That's a great place to go, but very challenging to find a table if it's busy like during the con, so just be mindful of that. So I think that's about it. I will probably tell some of my other AWA stories. There's lots of little inside jokes and stories, like don't vape in the hotel room, people pulling the fire alarms 2 years in a row and having everybody evacuate the building, stuff like that. I'll probably tell those stories as their own separate video, and I feel like I rambled a lot in this video, but I love AWA so much and I had so much to say, but I tried to keep this more along the lines of how do I feel about it as a convention rather than just my personal memories. But those two things kind of correlate with each other, so it is what it is. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will be back probably with... I want to do one on HamaCon, because the Hama Minicon was typically in November, I want to say, but it's not happening this year. And then Anime Blast Chattanooga, which is another tiny convention that doesn't exist anymore. So I wanted to get those two reviews out of the way before I do Holiday Matsuri in December. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.